I think that the language that the Senate produced is actually pretty good. There may be adjustments to that by some of our Democratic colleagues, but I don't want to let that get in the way of the broader progress that's needed by getting clarity through and across the line.
This episode is brought to you by Fortis X. Guys, let's be honest, the crypto market has been moving sideways for a while now. A lot of people are just sitting on their coins, waiting for the next big move. But while you're waiting, your crypto is just sitting in your wallet doing absolutely nothing. That's why I want to mention one of my longtime partners, Fortis X. Instead of just letting your assets sit idle, you can put supported cryptocurrencies into Fortis X liquidity pools and earn daily rewards while still keeping the flexibility to withdraw whenever you want. One of the reasons I've continued working with them is because they keep delivering. The team is public. They've successfully completed Cyberscope team verification, KYC, passed independent security audits, and the platform has been building consistently for years. They've focused on long-term growth, transparency, and security rather than hype. In a market like this, it makes far more sense to have your crypto working for you instead of letting it sit idle in your wallet. I've worked with Fortis X for a long time, and if you're planning to hold your crypto anyway, I genuinely think it's one of the smartest ways to put those assets to work. And folks, I know security is very important to all of us as we hold our crypto assets, and they are fully audited by CertiK, and they are SEC registered and much more. So you got to check out Fortis X. Go to fortisx.fi/x/thinkingcrypto. Link will be in the description. Hey folks, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm Tony Edward.
And I'm Amanda Whitcroft.
And joining us is Congressman Bryan Steil, who's a Republican out of Wisconsin. He's also the chairman of the Financial Services Subcommittee on Digital Assets, Financial Technology, and Artificial Intelligence. Congressman Steil, great to see you. Great to have you back.
Hey, Tony, Amanda, thanks for having me on.
Congressman, all eyes and ears are tuned into the Clarity Act. What can you tell us about the current status of this bill, the ethics piece, and all the conversations that are happening? It's all good things. We're seeing progress, but what can you tell us of where the status is?
I'm in the general view it's darkest before the dawn. I mean, some people are indicating it might die. I'm still optimistic that we get the deal done. We're down to a handful of topics that have been now negotiated for well over a year. We have an ethics piece. We have to discuss interest rates and some of the DeFi language that's inside of Clarity. I was always of the view that we would be best served if we took the House passed Clarity bill and simply moved it to the Senate for an up or down vote. Of course, the Senate wants to put their print on this. That's okay. But the key here is that we reach a resolution and ultimately get this across the line. Now that there's legislative text put down on paper by Republicans in the Senate, I think, and I'm hopeful, that gives us an opportunity to finalize the negotiations that are needed to get this thing all the way through, signed into law, to really unleash the capital that's sitting on the sidelines in this space.
Do you think the ethics agreement will be sufficient for the Democrats?
I think at the end of the day, it will be. I mean, I know the Democrats would, like to see all sorts of bells and whistles associated with that ethics language, and there might be tweaks off of the draft just provided on the Senate side. I think people broadly are open to looking at what those reforms are. I don't think anybody in the space wants bad actors in it and don't want politicians to be profiting off of inside information while they're in office. But I think that the language that the Senate produced is actually pretty good. There may be adjustments to that by some of our Democratic colleagues, but I don't want to let that get in the way of the broader progress that's needed by getting clarity through and across the line.
And on the other side of the coin, the banks seem to be still fighting on the stablecoin yield side of things. Do you anticipate that might be a big hurdle as well?
In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no. I mean, this was a lot of the debate we had when Genius was originally passed for stablecoin legislation. And this goes back to an earlier debate. Should we have moved Genius alongside Clarity at the same time? That was my view. That's not how it played out. Fair enough. But what we often see is when a bill goes through, followed by a second item, that second item carries negotiations from the first one. And it's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing negotiations of Genius on the back of the Clarity Act, which is frustrating to a lot of us when we negotiate what's not in a bill. My hope is that resolution can be reached. I think logical minds can agree on this space. Nobody wants to see deposit flight from our banks. I think the rules and regulations are in there to prevent that. But at the same time, we want to make sure that innovation and development is occurring here in the United States, and making sure in particular on the stablecoin side that we have a regulatory framework to protect consumers. Stablecoins were existing before Genius. They'll continue to exist after Genius. The difference is inside this regulatory framework, consumers are significantly protected. And that's actually good, obviously, for consumers, but it's also good for the industry because good actors are rewarded by operating under this regulatory framework.
Are members of the Senate and House monitoring the updates of crypto legislation that's getting passed in other countries?
Oh, very much so. I actually just had a meeting this week with members from the European Union discussing what legislation they're looking at. I've had conversations with our colleagues in places from Chile and Argentina to Japan and South Korea as well. And so the whole world in many ways is watching what's taking place in the United States. And I remember having a conversation with a deputy finance minister of one of the major countries in the globe. And we had a large conversation. And as we left, he said to me, Brian, if the United States gets clarity done, you're going to take a lot of innovation development that's occurring in our country and move it to the United States of America. And as I left and reflected and thought, that's in many ways what we're trying to do as policymakers, not to take it from other countries per se, but to get that innovation development to occur in the U.S. So many crypto developers, both financial capital as well as human capital, are still sitting in the sidelines outside the United States because policymakers in Washington can't get out of their own way by getting the Clarity Act all the way done and signed into law.
Congressman, once this bill passes the Senate, it then needs to go to the House. Do you anticipate there may be similar hurdles that the Senate's currently facing in the House, or it might be a smooth process because you guys got a version of this passed last year?
My hope is that it's a smooth process. I believe it will be. Why? Because we're in the negotiations with the Senate. This is a bipartisan, bicameral effort to get this legislative text done. Again, it's a handful of Democrats that we need to get on board this bill in the United States Senate. They need to get comfort, in particular, as it relates to the ethics provision. We have some language we got to get around DeFi, as well as the interest rate piece. But the broad framework of the bill is actually reasonably agreed to. That's what gives me my optimism. And then because this is bicameral in these negotiations in many ways, lots of us are at the table, it's my hope that the package that the Senate passes is ready for floor action in the House. I don't want to promise that to be the case because we want to read the text and review it. But by all means, we're part of this conversation with our colleagues in the Senate.
Quick follow-up to that. So as far as timeline, I heard many people are saying we need to get this done by August 7th. I'm assuming past the Senate, past the House, and then President Trump can sign it in later in August if he wants. But is the hard date August 7th?
Last year, I said it needed to be done by August. And so we've been dragging on this for quite some time. So broadly speaking, legislation as you head into the election, and there's just over 100 days between now and November 3rd, it just gets harder and harder to reach agreements. It shouldn't be, but that's just the reality. And so I think a lot of us look to that early August deadline as being a reasonable deadline for the Senate to act, because then the Senate will go home for a handful of weeks. And then all of a sudden we're into September and October before the election. And what I don't want to do is punt this to the backside of the election in a lame duck. So hopefully we see these negotiations move quickly. They can. But the proof will be in the pudding as we watch the Senate over the next handful of days.
What are your thoughts, I'm so curious, on Brian Armstrong's comment, or ultimatum, I should say, that if Clarity doesn't pass, he'll just move Coinbase offshore?
Well, hopefully that's not the case. But I'll let Brian Armstrong speak for himself. But I think broadly speaking, a lot of businesses are looking at it that way, right? Either businesses that are currently offshore, which are on the precipice of moving to the U.S., or worst case scenario, businesses that are in the U.S. that'll move offshore. It is so foolish and so frustrating that we can't get this done and across the line, because I think big picture, what Brian Armstrong's quote is referencing to is there's a lot of people who want to invest and innovate and develop in the United States, but the regulators, as controlled by members of Congress, aren't getting the policies finalized such that we can unlock this in the U.S. And so I remain concerned not only about maybe his business, but the industry writ large, that will go back into the days of really Gary Gensler, and people will be moving offshore and developing offshore rather than here in the United States under our values.
Yeah, absolutely. We are in a global competition. And believe it was just this week, Russia passed crypto legislation. I believe the UK is moving their version through the parliament. The EU already has theirs in place, and they continue to iterate and fine tune. So, Congressman, hopefully we can get this done. It's so critical for jobs and innovation and the future of the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, this global competition is real. The United States in many ways won the Web 2 race. I mean, that's in many ways why we are the global leader in the tech space. We need to make sure that we maintain that level of dominance as we continue moving forward. And the Clarity Act is going to be absolutely essential to making sure that the U.S. is the epicenter of innovation and development, in particular in the financial services space.
I'm so curious also, you've simultaneously been working on Clarity as well as the Insider Trading Act. Do you find that these two pieces of legislation are complementary to one another with regard to ethics?
In some ways, I think the Insider Trading Act that I just passed, the Stop Insider Trading Act, is really a focus and a look at Congress itself. There's a broad public concern that members of Congress are getting inside information, and then might be in a position to leverage that in the financial markets. Insider trading is really difficult to enforce. It's against the law for anyone, including members of Congress, to use inside information and then make a trade. The challenge, of course, is enforcing that. And so my solution says, let's just put a blanket ban on members of Congress from trading individual shares of stock while they're serving in Congress. The bill works. I was glad to see it pass with strong bipartisan support yesterday in the House. But the broader Clarity Act is really a regulatory framework, but maybe it hits a similar point of, let's just have rules of the road that work, that we can enforce, that we can show people how to do it right. How do we enforce bad actors? And it's a general premise of mine that good actors in almost any space or any industry, they don't want bad actors in that space. And so my hope is we can get the Stop Insider Trading Act across the line in the Senate. We can get Clarity done as well.
Does the bill cover just stocks, or does it cover other assets? Like, I could trade based on information I know, oil or other commodities, and obviously crypto has its own thing going on. But do you plan to add other assets into that umbrella?
Progress in Washington is often made incrementally, and so I think this is a big step forward in the Stop Insider Trading Act. I am open to the conversations. We've been having this with other types of assets that people own. The key here is to get it right. As we began kind of exploring some of the commodities, talked to some of my colleagues who have family farms, and you want to make sure that somebody can, for example, hedge their soybean crop. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's effectively needed if you're going to be a modern farmer. You don't want to just take the price of soybeans on the day the truck pulls up to your farm. But at the same time, we don't want members of Congress sitting and pretending that they're day traders behind their desk, making swaps or derivatives in, for example, the oil space. Of course, any insider and any inside trading would be illegal, period, full stop. But broadly speaking, I don't think we want members of Congress making their living by doing day trading activities. And so let's just put in the blanket ban on individual companies' shares of stock. And then let's look for other areas where we can reach that consensus that's needed to actually add to the ethics reform we just passed.
I want to move on to tokenization. Can you tell us about the recent hearings on this and the move towards tokenization as the future of markets?
Well, this is a great way to leverage technology to create massive efficiencies. And when we have efficiencies, if you believe in the free market like I do, the consumers are going to benefit by that, both by convenience, but also by price. When we talk in the financial services space writ large, there is a huge opportunity here for 24/7 real-time exchanges that you can carry a lot of metadata in these transactions that you would not have been able to do in the old days. And so some of this, I step all the way back. We had a hearing last Friday based on on crypto, but broadly in this broader technology space. We went to Federal Hall in New York City. Federal Hall, if you may remember or may know, was where Congress first met in 1789, sitting on Wall Street, now adjacent to the New York Stock Exchange. And we were talking about in that room is the beginning of the debate of should the states take on or should the federal government take on the debt of states that was issued to pay for the Revolutionary War. And you think about the financial decisions that were made and the technology that was needed back then to make those types of payments and the coupons. You go all the way up in the greenbacks issued as we head into the Civil War. You get the 33 and 34 Act. And a lot of that language is based on what was available at the time. Shareholders held shares. You get all the way up into tokenization. There are massive efficiencies that we can operate with to create a better plumbing system. The United States has been the beneficiary of the best capital markets in the globe. And if we lean in and get the tokenization piece right, I think you will see more efficiencies in the U.S. markets, stronger U.S. capital markets, and the U.S. capital markets are a massive benefit to innovation and development of new technologies here in the United States.
Beyond tokenization, are there other use cases that you and the folks in the subcommittee are looking at for blockchain? Can it be used in government and in different ways?
Yeah, I think there is massive opportunities here on businesses that will build on layer one blockchains. That are hearing in New York, go back to the same reference. We had the company Helium in. Helium is building out opportunities for people to be able to share bandwidth and Wi-Fi. In leveraging blockchain technology to do that, we asked, point blank, would your business operate if it wasn't for distributed ledger technology? And the answer is no. And so I think innovative businesses like that, you think about a lot of the paperwork and filings from car registrations or land titles that are going to be innovative and businesses that will innovate in that space. And then there's a lot of stuff we've never thought about. I mean, one of my favorite things to think about is if you go back and watch Back to the Future 2, they travel from the 80s into the teens. And they arrive in their flying cars and everything else, but they're taking phone calls in phone booths. Because the concept that you could hold a cell phone in your hand and talk to somebody without a line attached to it was a concept that was hard to grasp. Mm-hmm. A lot of those technologies are being developed right now, but until they become consumer ready, a lot of folks that aren't living and breathing in this space aren't aware of them. And so I think a lot of this is going to be transformational technology to the benefit of Americans. But we got to get the regulatory framework right so these innovators and developers are here in the U.S.
Once the Clarity Act is passed, do you believe the next priority will be crypto tax legislation? And do you believe after that maybe Bitcoin Reserve as well?
Yeah, I'm very open to walking and chewing gum at the same time. I think we can move forward on the tax piece and we can move forward and look at Bitcoin Reserve also. I think the tax piece is really important. So much of our legislation just was not built for the digital age. That's true in the regulatory space, which is clarity. It's also true in the tax space and providing rules of the road in the tax space so people know, for example, what is the basis? When is it a taxable event? Is mining and staking? When does the tax event occur? What happens if you make a donation of digital assets? How do we rule and regulate the value of that inside the tax code? That's really important to get right. Again, the more clarity, lowercase c clarity in this case, that we're providing in that space, the better off we are, and more people, businesses will be willing to engage and innovate in the space. We got to clean a lot of this up, but I think the tax code needs to go really in real time here. It's time that we have this cleaned up.
Well, Congressman Bryan Steil, thank you so much for your time and thank you for all your hard work and efforts. I think I speak for Tony as well when I say you have both of our support. Thank you.
Thank you both.